So, as we have spoken about numerous times over these last few weeks, yours is the last race to be certified in the 2024 election. You have won that race by over 700 votes. Republicans have challenged it. Your opponent, Jefferson Griffin, will not allow this thing to actually get certified, and his allies on different courts in that state are helping him through that process. As far as it remained right now, Republicans were challenging roughly 68,000 votes in the state. That issue went from state trial court to state appeals court, now to the North Carolina State Supreme Court, on which you sit and have recused yourself. They've ruled that roughly 60,000 of those votes can remain intact, and yet 7,000 of those are eligible for the cure process. Those are military ballots, overseas ballots, and their children. So first off, can I have your reaction to the fact that even still, as this process continues to play itself out all the way up to the North Carolina Supreme Court, that even these justices on the Supreme Court are not allowing your victory to stand and are still deciding that certain votes that have been cast legally are now subject to scrutiny, subject to being discarded?
Yeah. So 5.5 months ago, I won my race. It was close. I won by 734 votes. Two recounts confirmed my victory, but election litigation after the election has tied up the certification of my election so long. And every day this goes on, voters become more scared, more anxious, and more disillusioned in our democratic process. I am disheartened that our courts continue to allow this mischief to occur, but I am committed, no matter how long it takes, to fighting tooth and nail to make sure that every eligible vote counts.
Now, where do we stand as far as this cure process is right now? Because this is what they presented, that there are still 7,000 ballots that need to be cured. And so the two avenues, I guess, that could be taken here are that you engage in a mission to actually find these folks, find these 7,000 some odd North Carolinians, and make sure that they can cure their ballots, or this thing gets appealed. So where do you stand right now?
Just so your listeners understand, 60,000 voters in North Carolina are safe now. The North Carolina Supreme Court rejected Jefferson Griffin's challenge on those. So that's a good development, and it's, I think, important, the attention that's been paid to what's happened down there. So I'm gratified those 60,000 voters are safe for now. 7,000 voters, in a little in excess, we think, 7,000 voters will either automatically have their vote discounted or have it be presumptively discounted unless they send in a copy of a photo ID from overseas, from deployment, from battlefronts in the next 30 days once the notice goes out. So if you can imagine the chaos, it's hard to imagine, in fact, the chaos that is certain to ensue from a decision from a state's highest court saying 5.5 months after an election, a state law that was passed in 2011 by a Republican legislature unanimously to make it easier for the children of military and overseas voters who'd lived abroad while their parents were deployed in service. When they turned 18, they get to vote in North Carolina. That's been state law for 15 years, no problem. As of Friday, it is no longer state law, and it is being retroactively applied to the voters in my race alone in the 2024 election. Similarly, we have these about 6,000 of these military voters overseas or domestically. So North Carolina is a big military state. We've got a lot of folks who consider North Carolina their home base, but are serving active duty in Kansas and Hawaii and Washington State, but still treasure their North Carolina residence. They were told, and everyone knew, that they were not required to submit a photo ID with their absentee military ballot, in part because 95% of these voters use an online portal that the federal government has created to help these voters vote, because it's so hard to participate in the political process while your family is apart and serving in harm's way. But the Supreme Court on Friday said, despite the fact that these voters relied on the information that they were told and the information that everyone knew going into Election Day, those voters' votes will not count unless the Board of Elections or someone, or they follow the news, someone gets in touch with them and says, you have 30 days to do this process. You can imagine if you're a submariner, that's not exactly convenient if you
Right.
are on the mission field somewhere away from phone and internet. That is not particularly convenient. And we know with 11 million people in this state that some of these voters have died since Election Day, but they were legally entitled to cast their ballot on Election Day, and they will have that ballot tossed.
And so where do we stand right now in terms of is the cure process moving forward? Are you looking for folks, for my audience, for example, to help find, some of these 7,000 some odd North Carolinians who could benefit from being alerted about this?
Yes, so we need everyone's help. I think you can think of it as we're dual tracked now. We are fighting this in federal court. I have already filed my motion for a preliminary injunction in federal court. This is not going to end before the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. There's still, which is another way to say this is going to get litigated thoroughly in federal court and it's going to move quickly. So, on that one track, I really need your listeners to follow on my website, rigsforourcourts.com, or on my social media so that I can keep them up to speed. I'll keep coming on this show to
Yeah.
share because it's important that people know that this is not just a North Carolina fight. If democracy dies here, it's going to hurt people everywhere. But the other track, the dual track, is efforts are underway. This cure process shouldn't happen.
Right.
It's incredibly damaging to democracy. It risks so much, and we'll do whatever it takes to make sure that every eligible vote counts. So these are voters that we know are going to be hard to find. They are living overseas, they are on military bases, they are studying abroad, they are in the mission field, they are in foreign service that might be covert. We we know they're going to be hard to find. So your listeners can rack their brains for any voter, a military, student, expat who has been in North Carolina, who's voted in North Carolina. Check in with them to say, hey, are you on the Griffin list? And they can go to thegryphonlist.com to see if they're a part of these about 7,000 voters.
And are those, sorry to interrupt, are those names, do we have a list of those exact names so that if you have a family member, for example, if somebody says, oh, my uncle is a military member in North Carolina, will they be able to check that list to confirm that indeed it is their uncle and they can reach out to them?
There is a list. Part of the problem is there is some confusion still about whether that list represents the complete list of who my opponent is trying to have their ballots tossed. So it's a good starting point, I would say.
Okay.
But anyone who cast a ballot using a UACAVA method, that's the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Voting Act. It's for military members and their families serving domestically or abroad. So check in on your military families. They are going to bear a disproportionate burden of this. It could be students who studied abroad in the fall. It could be expats living abroad. It could be folks on the mission field or in the foreign services. Check on your friends, share on social media. There are going to be ways that we can plug in folks even remotely to help with this, but it's going to be expensive. Chasing voters like this is going to require data analytics and mail and all kinds of ways to try and touch these voters to get them aware of what's happening and engaged. And my hope is that my fight in the courtroom pulls the plug
Right.
very soon on this, but we're taking
Right, but
notes.
you still need to be prepared in the event that it doesn't, and so the cure process still has to be taken seriously and move forward.
Right. And, like this is why this is such a bad idea. I mean, 5.5 months after an election, voters already spoke. They already made their decision. The
Right.
idea that a political candidate's ground game determines which ballots get counted 5.5 months after an election. This is why we have pens down right before an election. We use the rules in place. Changes can be made going forward. But what's happening here, it is part of a game plan, we fear, for threats to democracy going forward. Because look,
Yeah.
I know it is a four alarm fire everywhere. But if democracy doesn't work, if votes can't be counted according to the rules in place, or if powers that be can toss ballots after an election, then we never get to change policy that's not serving us. We never get to oust leaders who are not representing our interests. We have to get this right if we're going to get anything right. And if we get this wrong, it will not stop ever. This will be the precedent for every different kind of election law to be challenged based on if a disappointed candidate thinks that removing that law is politically advantageous to them after the election. They win, great. If not, they can litigate this matter to death. We also know that my opponent challenged military voters in North Carolina in only four of North Carolina's 100 counties. That selective targeting is partisan. It was the four of the most Democratic counties in the entire state. If this stands, every election from here on out, from California to Maine, every election, you're going to have disappointed candidates saying, well, maybe we can pick off these voters in these unfriendly counties and regain a
Right.
win. It's just there is no end. And I know people hear a lot of parade of horribles, but trust me when I say I would not be working as hard as I am if I did not believe that this was a threat. I mean, I am doing my job, sitting on the North Carolina Supreme Court, keeping faith with the voters who chose me to keep serving them on the North Carolina Supreme Court, while I'm simultaneously remembering the oath I took to uphold our state and federal constitution, remembering what it was like when my dad was deployed and my family was separated, and how hard that was. And I am fighting for Americans all over to make sure that the precious and fundamental right to vote is respected and that decisions of voters is acknowledged.
Justice Riggs, you mentioned that this was going to be an expensive process to find all of these voters. Is there a place on your website, Riggs for Our Courts, that folks who are watching and listening right now can donate?
Yep, there's ways they can support my campaign and my legal defense fund, because dual tracking, one side is political, one side is legal. There are so many groups too that if you sign up for notices from me, you can learn about ways to engage by phone, by email, by social media. This is going to be a really mammoth undertaking,
Yeah.
one that it has no precedent before, because this has never happened before. So we're building the airplane as we fly it. But I can tell you that there is no one I feel more comfortable putting my chips on than the people in North Carolina fighting to have every vote counted, the people listening to your show who understand how serious this threat is. There's incredible power out there. There's an incredible commitment to what is right and just and fair. And I think in fighting this fight, we're going to show a lot of folks what it looks like to manifest and be resistance in hard times.
Well, look, I think the point that you made about this being a test case for Republicans is exactly the right one. And, there was so much worry in the lead up to the 2024 election that in the event that Trump lost, that he would basically be able to just undermine any win for Kamala Harris and just take over himself. And clearly that wasn't necessary at the presidential level, but it's happening right here in North Carolina. And to Justice Riggs' exact point, this is the test case for Republicans moving forward. If there is any race that they're not content with the results of, they'll just figure out some way to litigate and cherry pick some districts that overwhelmingly constitute Democratic voters and basically try to eliminate those votes. And this is the way that they're seeking to do it. So look, we have the benefit right now of the fact that there's no other races happening across the country. And so this is where I would highly recommend everybody focus their attention. If there is a way to donate or volunteer your time, or especially reach out to family members, friends, neighbors, colleagues, coworkers in North Carolina who may be on this list. Justice Riggs just confirmed that we'll be able to find some way to get to that list from riggsforourcourts.com.
Yep, there's a tab at top that says the Griffin list.
Okay.
Click on it and it is searchable.
Share that website, share that list far and wide. This is, again, an all-hands-on-deck effort, regardless of whether you live in North Carolina or not. The more that this thing gets shared, the more that we spread it across social media, the more that we spread it through word of mouth, the more people are going to see it. So I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. And Justice Riggs, I will have you on very soon, and we'll continue to sound the alarm about this issue as we continue to get closer and closer to that deadline. With that said, thank you for taking the time today, and thanks for fighting as hard as you are.